everyone, and welcome to this conversation presented by White House Custom Color. I'm Jed Taufer. Thanks for listening. You know, my wife Vicki and I have owned and operated our photography studio, V Gallery, for 20 years now. White House has been our lab for the last 16 of those years, and we could not be happier. White House is a family-run business, just like ours. If you haven't already, check them out at whcc.com. And if you want to drop me a line, feel free to email me at jed@whcc.com. Have you ever met someone who knows so much stuff about so much stuff that you don't even know where to begin with them? I recently had the absolute privilege to sit with Ed Monahan and discuss all kinds of relevance. And boy, did he deliver. He's one of those rare folks that seem to have so much information at the tip of their fingers that their main challenge is keeping up with themselves. Ed is a sage, a wise man in the classical sense of the term. We discuss the behavior of today's consumer, as well as the impact of technology on them and us as entrepreneurs. And Ed doesn't slow down for a second. This is another strap yourself in and have the notebook handy episode, friends. Here we go. Mr. Ed Monahan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jed, for having me.
Could you tell me a little bit about who you are?
Well, I'm an ex-Kodak, if there's such a thing exists. Spent 30 years at the Kodak company and then about another 4 at Alaris, and left in August of 2017. Spent a lot of time doing research, understanding markets, understanding and forecasting where products and technologies would change markets, and then came to work for White House for a couple of years and have just never looked back and have just been thoroughly blessed.
I feel like you have been, if that's what you did, and I believe that that's what you did, but I feel like you saying that, I get this image of you being in the center of the eye of this big storm. That's what comes to mind, considering what's happened in our industry in particular in the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, and I'm old enough to have been through many of those storms.
Right.
Beginning with the conversion from film to digital cameras, and I worked as a leader to create film scanners so we could prolong the life of film and convert film into a digital file. And then that eventually gave way to digital printers, and then that gave way to digital cameras in total. And it's really been, you know, you talk about the storm. The other thing I've done a lot of is try to look at parallel industries, the way the music industry, the way the entertainment industry had changed and been disrupted by technology. And in having done that, what were the discoveries or learnings that would apply to the portrait industry? You know, there's a new buyer in town, this millennial generation, just Gen Y or Gen Z as they're affectionately known. And it was really important for us, I think, to understand why were they behaving the way they were and how could we help our industry partners, labs and professional photographers, leverage that learning to sell differently, to sell what they sell is different, how they sell is different, where they sell is different. But yeah, good analogy, perfect storm.
Well, that's what came to mind. I mean, I remember it from my perspective, and I didn't have a lot of background before this millennium. Like we really got going in like 98 or 99. So I don't have the history of before that. You
missed some great years.
Well, I think I did. I'm sure I did. But I know you probably weathered a lot of storms over the years, but the last 20 years, is it fair to say that the last 20 years that those storms or that storm has been much more significant than what you were familiar with beforehand?
I think it's absolutely fair. In fact, I think if you plotted the rate of change from 1950 to 1990, and then 1990 to 2005, and then 2005 to 2015, the rate of change has been amazing. But it's not just the rate of change, it's the impact of change. You know, you think about music, you and I are old enough to remember vinyl when that was the only thing. And then it went to cassette, and then 8-track, and then it went to DVD, and then it went to single song choice by Apple or Walmart.com, and now it's streaming. You know, it's interesting because in the end, music has been upended in the way music is delivered to the person. But the artists themselves remain the same. And I think that some of that is true of professional photography. The professional photographer is still the linchpin in the system. The ecosystem begins and centers on their ability to craft and take a great, fantastic picture. What's changed is what happens after that. And, you know, again, film necessitated a print. The physics of film required you convert that film image to a print of some sort. And the silver halide technology was a single-sided print. Now we're printing on metals, we're printing on acrylics,
Yeah.
we're printing on electrophotography materials. So yeah, I think it's very fair to say that the rate of change and the impact of change in the last 20 years has been magnanimous on the industry.
So you've studied behavior,
Consumer behavior as to how they purchase, why they purchase, where they purchase.
and primarily behavior of Gen Y and Gen Z?
Predominantly the millennial generation, because if you think about like the school market, it's children. And so the parents of those children are our millennial generation.
Are younger, right.
The boomers that I'm part of are now grandparents.
Grandparents, right.
Yeah. And we probably are bigger buying public than the industry realizes, because we have money and we
Right.
have time
Right.
for those that are retired, but we don't have a desire to be in the picture. We just want pictures of our grandchildren. But it's the behavioral study and quick why this happened. Back in the 90s and into the 2000s, as the digital disruption was changing the market, we were asking photographers what was happening, and it was an unfair question to ask them. They know that their buy rates were changing and what they were selling was changing, but they didn't know why. So we asked the labs, and the labs could tell us that business was down at film and it was growing in digital, but we didn't know why. And so at Kodak, we decided we really had to understand the behavior at the end user level. And we began a series of surveys that piggybacked on work we were doing from 95 on. And as an example, we were interviewing or surveying 40,000 U.S. buyers every other year. So a pretty significant database.
Yeah, that's big.
That's really big. And it just continued into the 2000 era, 2010 era, and by default, the people you were surveying who are the buyers of your portrait products, families with children, were millennial parents of young children. So that it kind of led to that. But it also became a personal interest. The millennial generation, on the one hand, is actually very predictable. They're very well understood, probably the most studied generation in the last 30 years, but they are different. And so anything you learned in marketing and salesmanship 101 from 1990 to 2005, you got to throw away.
Is that right?
It doesn't apply. I mean, the constructs and the basic foundational tenets of marketing are the same, but what you say, how you say it, and where you say it has changed dramatically. In fact,
How so?
I'll quote. So, you and I grew up in an era where the brand promises is what we counted on. We trusted. The brand claimed something, we believed it.
Okay.
This generation, with peer reviews, would say the assertion of the brand pales in comparison to the experience of a peer. So, peer reviews are a much more driving force in the desire or decision-making process, as an example. Millennials are minimalists. They buy based on need, not based on want. But I think the biggest thing, three words come to mind: choice, convenience, and control. What they've learned through Netflix versus Blockbuster, or Netflix and Hulu versus cable, is they are empowered. We've seen a switch in the supply chain of who holds the power. It's no longer the manufacturer or the brand, it's the buyer or the consumer. And it's being driven by their craving for choice, convenience, and control. The other thing that happened, Jed, was technology availed this generation of a couple things: infinite and immediate reach. You get a set of wallets from a school shoot or a portrait shoot, it takes you weeks to get them out. You take a picture or get a digital file and put it in Facebook, it's going to an infinite audience immediately. And with Facebook, there's this thing called likes and feedback mechanisms. So infinite and immediate reach became a craving and almost an essential need that a consumer at a millennial level had. Infinite and immediate reach, anytime, anywhere access. Think about your cell phone: ubiquitous capture, ubiquitous availability to technology and content. And the last part was real-time, anytime connection. This is a wired generation, or should I say a wireless generation.
So how much of, if you were to look at the millennial generation and consider the concept of nature versus nurture, how much of who they are is solely because they've been nurtured in an era where technology exists to make them who they are?
I think that that's a great synopsis of where we find ourselves today. Technology has availed utility, and utility has led to choice, and that choice is really a different set of choices than you and I would make, and for a different set of reasons. But they've been technologically empowered, and then it becomes a psychological approach. I can overhear, I should be able to hear. We get into things like exits and abandonment. There was a study, 10 years ago with commercials. If the image wasn't changing every 10th of a second, at the 1 second mark, the millennial was gone. They just wouldn't watch your ad. You and I would take us 10 seconds to read the advertisement in a magazine 10 years ago. But no, I think you're onto something very, very important, because technology has not stopped evolving. And,
Right.
And has it influenced the last 20 years? We have to believe it's going to influence the next 20 years.
I mean, it's changed dramatically in the last 3 or 4 years.
It has. And again, using music or entertainment, you think about, the Blockbuster video example, and it's a great example because Blockbuster had 3 advantages over Netflix. It got content that much sooner than Netflix.
Yeah.
It had a wider variety or array of choices of content, and it paid less for it. And it was the darling, in the late 90s, 2000, 2005, it was the darling of the street because it was a phenomenal model. But if you think about the Blockbuster model, back to choice, convenience, and control, my wife and I live in Rochester, New York. She says to me, honey, Friday night, let's watch a movie. 13 inches of snow on the ground, trek through the snow for 20 minutes to the video store.
And it's not there.
It's out. Stand in line and, come back with the movie, and 10 seconds into it, it's scratched or it's not the movie she wants to watch.
Oh, yeah.
So we're done for the night.
Right.
With Netflix, this happens all the time. We're 3 minutes in, whoop, switch, try another thing.
Kids, that story that he just told happened a lot.
Yeah.
They have a hard time even wrapping their minds around that.
Yeah, but I think, again, back to your excellent point, the studies we did, and it was kind of a chicken and the egg, was the behavior pulling the technology to better places, or was the better places because you could achieve the technology, bringing the consumer there? And as I said to someone at a leadership level, it doesn't matter. The point is they're somewhere else.
It is what it is.
It is. And, there's a digital utility, and of course the portrait industry has seen this, and, the heresy in the room is the demand for professional capture for craftsmen. And I'll say this, the iPhone is amazing. And the iPhone's advantage is not that it takes a better picture than a professional with technology, because it doesn't. And it doesn't because mom's not really trained to take a good picture the way a professional photographer is.
Right.
What the iPhone does is ubiquitously let her capture life every single moment of the day. And the photographer can't be there at key moments. But there are special occasions that she's not trustworthy to take the kind of quality photograph that a professional can.
Right.
So my point is the professional photographer is here to stay. In the same way, craftsmen in any industry, plumbers, electricians, different people who have a skill set that's better than do it yourself will always have a living. The challenge for the lab industry is where do they fit and how do they manifest the sitting from a digital file back to a physical print. And, I'll be talking at SPAC in a week and a half or so. It's interesting, Jed, because the digital utility is here to stay. And in some ways, digital versus print is not a fair fight. Again, anytime, anywhere access, real time, all the time, connection, infinite immediate reach. Having said that, there are things we've lost our sights on that the print is not a fair fight to the digital. The print has utilities in itself, and I'll talk about that at SPAC. And so what I would say, the strategy that I would embark on if I was in this industry is an and strategy, digital and print.
Both and. Rather than either or.
There is utility the digital file is demanded to deliver, that it does deliver, and the mother or the father or the end client wants. But there's utility that print has in terms of archival quality, physical, tactile artifacting, prominent display within the home. And I think the other thing that we've talked about, the technology of film to digital capture, but the output side has changed dramatically. And you've seen that in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. We've gone from printing on silver halide exclusively one side of 2 dimensions, X and Y, to we're printing in both sides with duplexing. We're printing on acrylics, we're printing on metals, we're printing on bamboo.
Right.
And the question in my mind is, what do we print on next year or the year after?
Right.
But anyway, I digress.
But that's also a result of technology. Like it seems to me like the common thread here is the advancement in technology and how even over it's almost like this logarithmical or this graph that looks like a hockey stick because technology is always advanced, or at least in modern history it's always advanced to some degree, but lately it's like just shooting through the roof. And what you said, that professional photographers are here to stay, and that's comforting.
Yes.
But what do you say to somebody that is concerned about what that hockey stick does to the industry regarding barrier of entry for competitors or for the moms that are able to take those pictures?
Yeah, great question. Technologically, the hockey stick will always prevail to bring technology to a greater utility in the choice stack. Mm-hmm. If it was as simple as algorithmic or artificial intelligence being the defining factor in who mom picks for a picture, the photographer would have reason to be concerned.
Yeah.
The thing that makes the photographer a craftsman, and I've said this, is God made them different. Terry Dayglow, an established Kodak mentor, worked with me early in my career, was supposed to be a week to train me about being a portrait photographer. And about 10 minutes into it, he took the camera out of my hand, sat down and said, "You're done." And I said, "I have not even started."
You can retire from that career.
I said, "I haven't even started." He said, "You're done. You're an engineer.
Really?
You're thinking linearly. You're thinking your way through this." He said, "A professional photographer feels." Jed, what a professional has that an iPhone will never have is the ability to personify life. They see the human spirit through the lens, and they create a moment in time where they hit the button and they capture the image. That can't be replaced. And the example I'll give for those that are in my generation, and the younger generation listening may have no idea what I'm talking about, but there was a thing called a PVAC, a film analyzer. In the film days, before you printed, you had to analyze the film for what's called printing density, red, green, blue values. And we, for 30 years, talked about how technology would eventually replace the human eye and algorithmically would predict the color and the print density, and it never did. Because there's just something about a industry where the human dimension cannot be replaced. And so I say to the photographer, continue to perfect your craft, continue to trust what God has given you the ability to do. And I appreciate this the same way I sing in the shower, because I can't sing, and also I appreciate music. I sing in the shower. They call Child Protective Services, get the kids out of the house. But I also appreciate photography, because Terry told me you can't be a portrait photographer. And he said, that's why we're going to be here forever. Those of us, not including myself, who have the gift and the art of seeing human life, human spirit, personification of the moment, will always have a job. Because there's times in life, the days we get married, the day our children are born, the day our children are memorialized through the school and sports years, high school seniors, there are enough special occasions each and every year that it warrants and deserves and is worthy of a professional photographer.
So given that, you're making me think of this now. Given that, is that not why it makes more sense than ever, if you're a professional photographer, to focus on relationships with your clients?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the piece that you bring to the table.
Absolutely. And it's the piece that the consumer, the millennial consumer, is looking for. They want to know you.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Relationships are very important to them. And there's data that PPAV had that I'll be talking about at Imaging on a talk Sunday night that talk about what the consumer criteria is, the path to purchase journey. And you've hit the nail on the head and given away the trade secret. It's relationships. People want to be able to do business because it's not artificial intelligence, and because it overcomes the technological advances made in cameras and lenses and image sensors and onboard processing, because it's the human heart that feels life and feels personification. They want that relationship. And so, I would say avail yourself to your client. And in fact, I think we've seen a transition in the industry already where a lot of the up and coming, the new breed of photographer, young women in particular, are very effective because they're taking pictures of other young women's children, and young women relate to young women. And
so there's a lot of resonance there.
A lot of resonance there. It's not a functional or sterile environment in which you're dealing with a photographer. Because again, you're emotionally wed to the occasion. It is You've hired somebody who's charging you quite a bit of money, and should, because they're really good at what they do. But therefore, you want it to come out right. And it isn't just a functional relationship where they're standing at the altar getting the shots or they're posing. They're working, engaging with you constantly, and you have to trust them. The other thing that you didn't ask, and I'll jump to the thing, in addition to the relationship, it's meeting the consumer, the millennial consumer, where the millennial consumer plays in the spaces and places that they behave, and it's online. There's no doubt that they search, and the data will show this on Sunday night, a week from now. They search through the internet, and they scour. And as I said, the assertion of the brand pales in comparison to the experience of the peer. Well, where do they get that peer review? It's not in a magazine. It's not in a direct mail piece. It's in the online world. So the reality is the photographer has to avail themselves on a personal level with trust and credibility and relational boundaries and barriers that they overcome. They've got to be found on the internet. They've got to use the internet to their advantage, and they've got to have in my opinion, an and strategy. I'll sell you digital to the extent it has utility that you demand and crave, but I want you to understand I can do more than give you a digital file. I can give you a phenomenal experience to display proudly throughout the home. Brag on yourself, brag on your children. And with that, I'll let you ask another question.
So this is, okay, you're doing a very good job of making my brain go to these questions. I'm thinking, with everything that you're saying, it sounds like, and people say this, but to reiterate this coming from you is a big deal. It sounds to me like social media and self-promotion are that much more important
social media and being promoted by others, because it's still a word of
Via
mouth.
social media.
Via social media.
Right.
And again, I talked about music hasn't changed at the artistic level. It's changed in the way it's purchased or received at the consumer level. To your point, at the end of the day, the professional photographer is selling themselves and their artistic capability. And the opportunity for the consumer to use social media is just a different courier. It used to be word of mouth. You'd be at a party or you'd be at a friend's house. You'd say, and again, word of mouth is a misnomer. Usually what happens is you walked into someone's home and saw a portrait.
You see it, yeah.
Wow.
Right.
Who did that?
Right.
That's amazing.
Right.
Damn, you look good, girl.
Right.
and it was word of mouth in the sense that it was viral marketing, but it stimulated on the sight of a picture. Now what happens is social media is just a career. It's still the same conversation amongst the same number of people, except it happens faster. And it brings up an interesting thing that we talked a little bit about at the dinner the other night. People should Google search themselves, because social media works both ways. It's a courier of good news. It's also a courier of bad experiences.
Brings it all.
It does. But to your point, and it's an excellent point, the photographer has to build that relationship and be availing of a relationship. And they've got to allow social media to do what it does best, and that's promote, or give the audience a chance to find others who promote them for themselves.
I ask because so many times during these podcasts, even when we get to the point where we're talking about social media, which inevitably happens most of the time, the reaction that a lot of people have is, I have this love-hate relationship with social media. I do it because I have to do it, but I don't like how often I feel like I have to do it.
Yeah, and what really should happen is social media should be done about you, not by you, if that makes sense. In other words, as I say, the assertion of the brand of, what is the photographer going to say? I'm not really very good. Please consider the guy down the street.
I'm okay.
What is Kodak or Fuji going to say?
Right.
Use the other guy.
Right.
The assertion of the brand has been lost because no one trusts it anymore. Of course, it's going to say good things. The photographer should see social media as an avenue or a channel of word of mouth communication. And what the consumer who's investigating or trying to discover you wants to understand is not what you say about yourself, but what social media does is, one, I can see your work.
Yeah.
I can see, and it's not just the quality of your work, it's the style of your work. Are you innovative? Are you trendy? Are you aligned with what I want for this occasion to look like? So the social media first makes me available as a photographer to a larger audience where they see what I do, but then they can check me out with peer reviews. And that part of social media, the peer reviews, isn't something you do for yourself. And to your point, Jed, it's a great love-hate relationships comment, because it doesn't always work.
Right.
You do something that in your mind was a trivial situation that was overcome, and the next thing you know is you're being pasted or blasted in social media.
Right.
But again,
but on the other end of the spectrum, you can go viral.
You can go viral, infinite and immediate reach.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like all things, we started this conversation on technology. Social media is the new channel of communication and advertising. It's how you make yourself available. It's funny, I have kids that are between 28 and 32, 35. I know it's hard to believe. But it's interesting because they don't have cash. They don't have a checkbook. Everything is...
They don't have cash.
They don't have cash. And I said to my daughter, how do you reconcile your checkbook? She goes, I don't have checks.
I don't have those.
There's nothing unaccounted for. So, but
She doesn't have to write checks.
Yeah. And they use that debit card or PayPal for a $1.75 purchase. I mean, they've got 100. But my point in that is that's the new ecosystem.
Yeah.
It's the new millennial mantra. And if you are a photographer attempting to sell to a millennial mom to, photograph her family and her children, she's going to discover you foremost in the internet or in the social media world. And right or wrong, it is what it is.
So SEO is also a big deal.
Big deal. SEO, Facebook, Instagram, followers. And I'll go back to, if you're a photographer who still sells portrait prints and wall display, you're going to be discovered when people who are visiting the client that you last served see the quality of the work on your wall.
The system seems to be set up to reward the narcissist. Am I being jaded? Call me out.
No, you can't be that good if you aren't a bit of a narcissist.
So that hasn't, you're saying that that's existed to some degree always.
Yeah, I think the best of the best know they're very good, and there's a humility in their pride. And I know that's kind of an oxymoron.
It is a bit, yeah.
But there's a humility in their pride. Arrogance or conceit can be unwarranted.
Yeah.
It's truly arrogance. You're arrogant about your abilities and you really don't have them.
Right.
The social media sphere is vets. You can say, again, the assertion of the brand. You can claim anything, but the last client you serve will tell a better story.
We'll let people know, right?
But, and back to your relationship thing, the narcissism may be what propels you and motivates you and compels you to be better than the guy down the street. But at the end of the day, when you're talking about relations with a client, you have to appease to them and talk to them in the space and place that they want to be talked to. But that's a good point. I never thought about the narcissism aspect. Any great leader, any great success story has to have a little bit of ego behind them.
Right, you're right. And I don't even really mean to paint the picture so bleak as to say that, narcissism is inherently bad, through and through. But I just feel like the way that the system's set up is that a little bit of that, at the very least, is almost necessary.
It is, especially when you're competing for likes or you're competing for
followers or likes or comments or shares.
No, that's a great point. And to your point, narcissism is not necessarily a bad word.
It's hard for me to say that, but I think that in this instance, right?
But it's interesting because the ego and narcissism that you've spoken of isn't necessarily said by the person about themselves. It's said about them. And again, that's the beauty of social media. It's not a respecter of persons. It says what it says, and sometimes it's wrong and it's unfair and judgmental, but it's mostly right.
Most of the time, I think
peer reviews work.
It's just that when it's not, it stings.
It does.
It can be brutal.
But that was happening before. The difference with social media, back to this infinite media reach, is when you had a person against you, they told 15 people because that's all the contacts that they had in the telephone world. Today,
now they can tell 15 million.
Yeah, exactly.
And it can happen real time in front of everybody.
and that's where technology has gone awry. And it's like, a terrible example, but in the schoolyard, the bully beating up another kid was witnessed by the eyes of 15 people and it was forgotten by 4 p.m. Today it's witnessed by 30 to 40 cell phones and it's on Facebook, and the poor kid that got beat up is humiliated in front of thousands and
in
tens
perpetuity
of thousands.
To who knows who.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we digress.
Right. Well, yes and no. This makes me think on a larger scale. Like if I look at what we're talking about from 30 or 40,000 feet, right? I find it, I don't know, like tragically ironic to some degree, because I hear a lot of people in my generation and in your generation, right, complain about millennials.
Yes.
Lots of complaints, and maybe that always happens too, because I feel like when I was a kid, it was, Gen X, or we were the slackers, right?
Yeah,
And I understand how that works, but I also think it's very interesting, given our nature-nurture conversation earlier, that to some degree, millennials and who they are have really been created by Gen X and boomers, and what the Gen X and the baby boomers have been doing for the last 50 years regarding technology. It's almost like you're complaining about that, what it is that you made possible to happen.
It's a great point. And I'll go back to the social media. You're right. Our parents complained about our generation. Their parents complained about their generation. The social media aspect, the millennials are getting a bad rep that's being escalated or, exacerbated by social media. We never knew how bad the boomer was. But they were just as bad in their own way. Right. But it wasn't told on Facebook.
Because you just had the 15 people talking about it on the phone.
Exactly. Had 15 people. Did you know what he did? You know what she did?
Right.
But there is, to your point, Jed, there is a stereotypical dimension to millennials being cast, living in their parents' basements, gaming and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of good. In fact, I talked last year at SPAC, and I focused. It's funny you said I focused on millennials, and it was basically, your customer, your employee or your boss. Imagine being 55 years old and having to work for a 30-something.
Yeah. Right.
But your point is, I want to get back to your point. We've made them.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
We've availed them of technology. We've empowered them. Again, Netflix, Hulu examples, and Amazon.
Yeah.
Think about being a professional photographer and trying to compete in a world of online selling and retailing that dominates. In fact, it's funny, I'll talk about this at SPAC. Remember the days when Amazon was selling books and Kindles?
That's what it was,
and
books.
Competing with Borders and Barnes & Noble?
Right.
And again, the generation listening to this are like, what are you talking about? This is the largest economic retailing giant in the world. Yeah, but there was a time where they were just selling books
it was
online.
Books. Yeah.
But you make a great point, because we've got to be careful, not only to not criticize because we've created the monster, but it's not a monster. There's a lot of good in the millennial generation. They're socially responsible more than any generation before them.
Well, at some point, we're going to bite the hand that feeds us.
Yes.
Is that not right? And maybe in some cases, literally.
Yeah, if we're not careful, for sure. But to your point, we've got to, again, as a professional photographer, we've got to be careful not to buy into all the stereotypes. We've got to recognize that the technology that's made them is both friendly and foe. Yeah. As we sell into them, and yet there's a lot of redeeming qualities. I think that they've inherited the world that we left them, and they're going to, many of them, make it a better place to live as they go forward.
What are in your parting words here on this podcast? What sort of advice do you have for the current photographer right now, in how it is that they can best position their business and what they're doing for this market that we're discussing?
Yeah. Do we have a half an hour?
Well, I know that's a big softball for you.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. You've put me on the narcissism thing. The first advice I'd give is recognize what you do is a God-given talent, and it makes you different in a better way. Yes, mom may have technology in her hands, and she may be with that child all day long, every day long, but there are times in life where she will call on you because what you do can't be replicated in technology. And that's my number one message. You cannot be replaced by technology. Even artificial intelligence is not going to replace you. You inherently have a gift to see the personification of the human spirit through a lens and to capture that moment. The second thing I would say is embrace social media. Embrace it for what it is. It is the new communication vehicle. The third thing I'd say is don't try to force digital to compete in a fight against print. Let them both coexist.
I love that.
There are reasons that digital utility will always be better than print, and it should be served to a consumer. And as fast as I say that, I want to say, and there are reasons that print has utility over the digital file. And the manifestation of your captured file is really best understood and appreciated on the wall.
I love the both and mindset as opposed to the either or, because we get stuck in that either or sometimes.
Yeah, that's critical. And the final thing I'd say is, take advantage of the things that you, Jed, and White House provide to equip yourself to be better at your craft, to be better at selling. And the final advice I'd give is enjoy your art. There's no better experience for your clients than when you're enjoying what you're doing, because you're making their world a better place that are going to be documented forever.
Ed, thank you for your time and for
fitting me in. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you.